Lubna, Qureshi, why'd you choose to write about the 1973 coup in Chile?
Well, I developed an interest in the Nixon administration when I was an undergraduate. And I had originally intended to write about Nixon in Vietnam, but already so much had already been published about that area that when President Clinton declassified thousands of relevant intelligence documents relating to the coup in Chile, I thought that would be a more productive area of research.
And what did you learn?
Well, I learned three things. What I learned was that the Cold War had very little to do with Nixon's Chilean policy. This was a time of détente, and the Russians had already regarded Cuba as a drain, so they didn't want another client state in Latin America. Another thing I learned is that, of course, business interests were involved. U.S. corporate interests were threatened by President Salvador Allende's expropriation policies in Chile. And finally, Nixon and Kissinger arrived at the White House with their own preconceived imperial ideas about Latin America. They had a long-standing prejudice against the region as a whole.
And what happened in 1973? Briefly.
Well, in 1973, Salvador Allende was overthrown by Augusto Pinochet, the general, who was supported by the Nixon administration. But it's really simplistic to just say what happened in 1973. What happened then on September 11th, 1973, was just the end result of a process, a policy that began in 1970 with President Salvador Allende's election. From the very beginning, Nixon and Kissinger had cultivated ties with the Chilean military and, in fact, had sponsored the assassination of General Rene Schneider in 1970, the constitutional general, chief of staff of the Chilean military, because of his respect for the principle of military subordination to civilian authority. So with his assassination, the Chilean military got the message that they could be next unless they towed the line.
So, Nixon, Kissinger, and Allende is the name of the book, U.S. Involvement in the 1973 coup in Chile. What can we learn from this for today?
Well, recently, Ralph Nader described George Bush as the most multiply impeachable president in U.S. history. And to many Americans, our intervention in Iraq seems out of the ordinary, and they're just appalled by what Bush's policy. But the fact is, if we read my book, we'll realize that unwarranted interventions overseas are just part of a historical pattern on the part of Washington.
Published by Rowman and Littlefield, Lubna Qureshi is the author.